So, good evening, everyone. We're very excited tonight to have Ryan Bernsten with us. He is a professional speaker and author of 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy. Armed with a grant from the University of Oxford, he embarked on an epic 23,000-mile journey, visiting 150 cities across all 50 states. Staying with people from all walks of life, Ryan immersed himself in their stories. He discovered that beneath the surface, Americans long for unity and shared values. Ryan's nonpartisan talk encourages us to focus on the positive changes happening in our own neighborhoods and communities. By being actively involved and open minded, we can make a real impact while being aware of the dangers of social media's echo chambers and how they perpetuate divisiveness, emphasizing the importance of looking beyond these platforms to find real connections and meaningful conversations. Ryan's message inspires us all to contribute to a constructive, compassionate, and collaborative America. So I know in Bloomfield, we're very much about community. So I'm really excited, Ryan, to welcome you tonight and hear what you have to share with us.
Wow. Well, unfortunately, Rachel, your bio introduction is about the best crystallization of what the book is all about. So you don't need to read the book and you can actually log off. You don't need to listen to this talk because that's sort of there in a nutshell. But for those of you who want to stay, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This book started as a passion project, and the passion has only gone forward in getting to speak to people. I've traveled to libraries and nonprofits, universities all across the world at this point. And my favorite thing to do is be with people in person to talk, but Zoom is pretty good too. I always want to preface this talk by saying that I am not the expert here. I am here to start a conversation with all of the people here. This is not uh, sit idly by talk. I'm going to be engaging you, hopefully, in discussion after I talk a little bit about my book and my journey. And I really am interested in learning about you and your community. I always say at these talks that I end up learning more from you than you probably will be learning from me. So I just want to say thank you for showing up tonight. And it's a real honor to be here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little preface from the book that gives some context of how I started on this journey all these years ago. And then Rachel and I are going to have a little conversation, and I'll be asking you some questions, then we'll do a Q&A. Hopefully that sounds good. Please feel free to eat some dinner while you're watching. Just tell me what you're having in the chat. So this is my book, 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy. If you're interested, it's at the library, but you can also get an audiobook. For those of you like raking leaves and listening to books, that's what I do. I'm a big hypocrite when it comes to reading because I love to multitask. But anyway, this is the book, 50 States of Mind, A Journey to Rediscover American Democracy. Preface. The pulse of America is elusive. There is no steady beat. There is only the erratic rhythm of a people with very little shared history, constantly rediscovering how to live together. Despite this, I, a staffer from a failed 2016 presidential campaign, read Democracy in America in graduate school, found inspiration in Alexis de Tocqueville's travels, and decided to follow in his footsteps nearly 180 years after his book's publication. I hit the road to talk to Americans of all stripes. With a grant from my graduate program at the University of Oxford, I drove 23,257 miles to visit over 150 cities, towns, and villages in all 50 states. I wanted to find answers to the defining questions of the era. Does American democracy still work? Can we still coexist peacefully? Amidst the horror of national headlines, I wasn't expecting to find something optimistic on the ground. I wasn't expecting to have to question my own place in our democracy, and I certainly wasn't expecting to find myself living somewhere new at the end of it. After the 2016 election, I wanted to understand the complicated country I lived in and where I fit into it. The question of what it means to be an American has always been difficult in a country so full of various cultures and viewpoints, let alone during such a polarized time. To accurately portray America's staggering diversity, I pushed myself to meet people from all walks of life. My mission was to listen, not teach, to learn, not lecture, and my only methodology was the desire to find someone unlike anyone else I had met before. I stayed in the homes of people across the country who opened their doors to me. In turn, I responded with an open mind and a generous ear. If I hadn't, this trip would not have been possible. This mindset also gave me space to learn what I didn't know about the diverse perspectives across our country. I found a surprising amount of common ground, and it became my belief that building bridges, even with those with whom we initially seemed to disagree, could be our last line of defense against a quickly radicalizing society. The breakdown of candid dialogue benefited only the powers profiting off our division and outrage, lest we realize how much we actually agree on. The late great Secretary of State Madeleine Albright crystallized the dangers of our political environment in her book Fascism, A Warning. At many levels, contempt has become a defining characteristic of American politics. It makes us unwilling to listen to what others say, unwilling, in some cases, even to allow them to speak. This stops the learning process cold and creates a ready made audience for demagogues who know how to bring diverse groups of the aggrieved together in righteous opposition to everyone else. With her words in mind, I consciously tried to rid myself of any vestige of self righteousness or contempt as I allowed my preconceived notions to be challenged by my fellow Americans. I hope you'll have your preconceived notions challenged too. Only then can we see what is within the bounds of normalcy and what is dangerous extremism, and be able to recognize the latter when we see it. Ultimately, American democracy is made up of unique states of mind and stories that inform every citizen's worldview. By deciding to start with the people, I was reminded that America is a community existing together in a shared moment, with far more in common than that which divides us. We have so much to learn from each other. I hope this book can take you on a journey to challenge your understanding of the United States through the small interactions I had with people all across the nation. By offering a sampling of the staggering diversity in America, I hope you experience the wonders, contradictions, oddities, and thrills of 50 very different states of mind. At a library near you soon.
Yes, we do have a copy. And you said it was on audiobook as well. I'll have to look in our different apps that we have and I'll let them know where it is as well. So that's great. Thank you, Ryan. So I'm so curious about how this all started. It sounds like something of a pilgrimage for you. Tell us a little bit about what kind of set you on this path to begin with.
Yeah, so as I referenced in the preface of the book, I got a job out of college on a 2016 presidential campaign, working starting in Iowa for Hillary Clinton. And it was the best job in the world, not because of any particular candidate or the people I worked with. It was the job I got to do every single day. I got to actually go out in communities, starting with rural dairy farmers in Sioux City, Iowa, and talk to them about what they cared about in our democracy. I was able to talk to Democrats, Republicans, and independents and actually hear from people and really stop and think about it. I was coming out of college and everything was theoretical. We weren't talking to people from diverse backgrounds about their experiences. And the primary system took me on a whirlwind trip all around the country. I went to upstate New York and talked to um, well to do people in rural New York. I went down to Florida and worked with Haitian immigrants in Boynton Beach, Florida. And my only job was to show up at community events and listen. And obviously, the election in 2016 did not go the way I planned. I did not move to Washington to work in an administration. I was left without a job, moving back to an apartment in New York City and wondering what to do with my life. So I did what anyone who becomes obsessed with connection does. You write an application essay to graduate school at University of Oxford, talking about the story of America, because I started asking, who gets to tell the story of America? I was watching the news try to tell me the story of America. I was watching social media feuds telling me the story of America. I was scrolling to see the story of America. And none of it really seemed to match what I experienced on the ground. Decent people who are able to sit down at a table and talk about policy, talk about their communities, and ultimately be optimistic. So I was accepted to University of Oxford and moved to England and stopped thinking about America for about 5 days, and then I started thinking about it again, and it coincided with my final thesis project, where I got 5 months to go do research, and I came up with this idea that I was going to travel to all 50 states and do what I did in the campaign, talk and listen to people about this very particular moment in American history. Of course, this seemed ridiculous. There was no way I was going to be able to travel to 50 states in 5 months, but my department said, "All right, Ryan, there's your rubber stamp. Go ahead with it." I was like, "I'm sorry, what? What do you mean? I need to get a car? I need to drive?" They're like, "Yep." I was like, "I don't have any money." So they gave me a small grant, but it was not nearly enough to cover traveling across the entire country for 5 months. But it actually handed me this incredible gift because I didn't have enough money to stay in nice hotels or do what a lot of people on TV did after the 2016 election, where they'd show up in a community with a camera crew. I had to rely on the generosity of American people. I went to my social media pages and said, I am taking this trip for 5 months. If you know anyone who would host me, I promise I won't steal your things, and I'm here to see the best in your communities. And America really showed up for me. I got to stay in people's garages, I got to stay on people's floors in their spare bedroom, and people across America wanted me to see the best of their towns. They wanted to introduce me to the change makers, to the nonprofit leaders, to the community leaders, in addition to elected officials. And it really opened my eyes to the great untold stories going on around the country.
So in your book, and like you say, you talk to a wide variety of people, and I'm sure everyone's got different viewpoints and opinions, and you have a sense of what's different among them. But did you come away from this experience with a better sense of what connects all of us as well?
Yeah, I would say there are two main threads right now in American society that were true then and are true now. And the first thing is people are incredibly proud of where they're from. It doesn't matter where you live, whether it's Gary, Indiana or Monterey, California. When I showed up in someone's community, they wanted me to walk away with a positive impression, even if there were problems in their community. And every community has problems, but the real takeaway is the incredible sense of pride and the incredible change makers that exist in every community. I mean, look at your community. Your community is investing in your libraries. People are showing up to events. There is a strong community organization, and a lot of places in my book want what you have. There are, I think of this place in Smyrna, Delaware, where there is a committee that is raising money for a new library because they think it is so important to their community that they got the funds themselves. They asked private sponsors, they applied for grants. They were trying to make their community better through a library. And that spirit exists all over the country. There is someone, no matter how uh, poorly ranked a place to live is. And let me tell you, I'm from Rockford, Illinois. Rockford, Illinois, and when I grew up there, it was the third most miserable city in America on Forbes list of miserable cities. Yet I knew that growing up, if you didn't show up for an institution, that institution would not exist. People had to actually work to make the place we live a better place. And that is going on around the country, people showing up in their local community to make a difference. The second piece is something that I don't hear talked about a lot. I think there's this sense that people don't always feel understood by other parts of the country. I live in Kansas City, Missouri now, and it's funny the things people say about flyover country. Kansas City is an amazing town, definitely on the up, but there are times that I feel misunderstood by living in flyover country, even though we are one of the most progressive cities in the country if you look at our voting history. And I think there are a lot of people in rural areas across the country that feel like maybe their stories aren't being portrayed in the media, or maybe that they are being intentionally misunderstood by a certain kind of media, or no one's coming and talking to them, or no one appreciates their contributions to their community. So I think there's this sense of where's my story? Why isn't anyone coming to listen to what I care about? And that's why this book was such an incredible experience. I actually got to sit down and talk to people for a whole meal over a beer, over a glass of wine, and learn about what's important to them and make them feel seen and hopefully important in this American experience.
Can you talk about how one's upbringing or hometown affects their worldview? It could be political or it could just be in general.
Oh my gosh. Well, Rachel and I were actually talking earlier a little bit because one thing I'm so scared of with this talk, especially post-election and things like that, is it becoming a partisan talk. This is a talk about how we have conversations about our democracy, and it's something that's not taught very well. And so, one of the tricks I learned when I was traveling is before talking about someone's political views, because often people would assume that this book was just about politics. I was like, it's not about politics, it's about democracy. It's about how we interact with each other, how we solve problems together, how we make change together, both through institutions that are non governmental and governmental. The best thing I learned to ask someone when we started talking about politics is saying, stop the conversation right there. Tell me about where you grew up. Tell me about the town you came from. Tell me about the values you learned there. And I often found that people, when they were trying to talk about politics, were trying to explain who they were through the language of politics. But when you allow someone to talk about where they grew up, the lessons they learned, what their parents taught them, the values that were instilled in them in school, you often find that the conversation that is about politics is actually just about their experiences, their questions about how the world is changing. There are questions about other parts of the country, and learning that none of us have all the answers as one person. Together, we combine our expertise and our knowledge to tell the story of America together. So I think the storytelling piece is how you change hearts and minds. And by the time we got back to talking about whatever political issue it was, we had a better understanding of what the other person cared about, what their values were, and ultimately what their story is. And I think that storytelling piece is the biggest takeaway from this book. I thought I was going to be writing a book that was maybe about politics or democracy, but it was actually much more about how the individual stories affect us as a microcosm of the greater macrocosm of our democracy.
Thank you. Um, there's a chapter in which you discuss an emerging regional inequality in this country. So you're a Rust Belt native and student at Northwestern and Oxford. It would be perfectly acceptable for you to move to a coastal city in a solidly blue state, but you chose not to do that. Can you tell us a little bit about what influenced that decision?
Absolutely. And I know this is a little niche, but I think it's very important, especially when I talk to young people and travel to colleges. I'll tell a quick story. When I was a senior in college at Northwestern University in Chicago, people would come up to me around graduation time and say, Ryan, where are you moving after college? Are you moving to New York City? Are you staying in Chicago? Are you moving to LA? Or maybe San Francisco or maybe DC? As though there were no other places that someone could go live a good life. And I think that mentality is very dangerous because there are so many great places to live across the country. And if we have the belief that the only way to make a good life is move to an oversaturated city and climb a ladder where there are already tons of people like you doing exactly what you want to do, we are robbing ourselves of an opportunity to learn from people in smaller cities across the country who are more accessible to take on leadership roles within those communities, to help shape those communities in the ways that we find important, and ultimately to bring our talents to a community that might not have, a dozen other people trying to do exactly what we're doing. I always talk about, there's someone in my book named Joanna Beatty Taft who moved from Washington, D.C., where she wanted to make a difference in the arts. She wanted to start a nonprofit for the arts. Well, do you know how many nonprofits for the arts there are in Washington, D.C.? You turn a corner, there's a nonprofit for the arts. She moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and she realized that she had a niche that she wanted to fill that no one else was filling. So she started a nonprofit aimed at keeping local artists in Indianapolis employed and in the community, as opposed to leaving for greener pastures. It was so successful that she went on to start her own charter school and to create a neighborhood organization. And it really just proved to me that not only did this move help her with her goals of creating a better artistic ecosystem, she felt like a bigger part of the community and a more integral part, and felt more connection to her neighborhood. And this isn't to say that people shouldn't live in big cities. It's just saying we have to figure out the canvas that we can contribute and get involved in. If you're in a smaller city, the canvas is a little smaller. You're in a big city, maybe your canvas is your neighborhood. Maybe your canvas is your borough. Maybe your canvas is a very particular community within that city. But it's important for us to show up and make a difference and not just throw up our hands and say, oh, things are going bad in the country, and I'm just going to go to this one place and enjoy a good life. We have to roll up our sleeves and try to make communities better, like it sounds like is happening in your community.
So when we were talking earlier, you were saying how you're a trusting guy and some even say gullible. This characteristic seemed to serve you well on your journey, but sometimes it presented problems and hilarity ensued. Do you view this trait in yourself as a strength or a weakness, and why?
Yes. Okay. So what I think Rachel is referencing is there is a story where I was almost murdered. I did meet a lot of wonderful people staying in people's homes. You have to trust that you're not going to wake up and, your things are stolen. I guess they have to trust that I'm not going to steal their things either. But I did go to a town called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, where I was subsequently chased around downtown in a truck by two men who were shouting not very nice words at me, and one of them maybe tried to drug my drink when I was at a bar. It was very spooky, and then we found out that it was a town that was full of serial killer accomplices. David Parker Ray was a serial killer who killed like 69 people, and everyone got off in a plea bargain. But for full details, 50 States of Mind. But I think the point that I learned from this is there are certain things that I don't have to think about. I was very gullible and trusting because I didn't have a lot of reasons not to think that I would be okay. And I think the big takeaway for me that I learned from this experience is I had friends who are women, friends who are people of color saying, you ignored all of these red flags. What is wrong with you? You could have gotten into a lot of really dicey situations, and I did. And I think that's part of what I balance what could be perceived as naivete of the book, that, America's a good place. People want what's good for them, with very real strife that we have in our history, to do with race and gender and all of those periods of our history. So it's important to balance that two things can be true at once. I can both be trusting and gullible. America can both be welcoming and unwelcoming at the same time. And that's the piece that is so interesting about this country. It's why people flock here and still dream about America, and why America has so much influence. Is it's everything. It's full of contradictions. And that's what I try to illustrate in the least heavy-handed way in my book, and let people speak for themselves and let their voices do the talking, as opposed to a lot of analysis from me after the fact. This is also where I plug that there's a podcast where, if you don't want to buy a book or you don't want to rent a book, you can go to wherever you get your podcasts, find the podcast 50 States of Mind, sift through the interview format, and actually hear the real voices from people in this book. So you can know that, okay, he didn't make it up like that tiny little pieces guy or anything. Like, all of these people that are in this book, you can hear them talk. And I think that's the amazing thing about it. From Ohio to Wyoming, uh, everyone is able to tell their own story. And that's where the trust piece comes in too. I think America has a trust problem with our institutions, with other people. And this book, hopefully, is a refreshing tale of there are still really good people out there that want to make someone's dream come true, like mine, by sleeping on their floor.
I will definitely send out information about that podcast. That sounds really interesting. Let's talk about news media and social media. What kind of role do you think the news media plays in this divisiveness?
Oh gosh. I mean, I really think we are not talking enough about how we get information. And this is not me shaming anyone on any particular side, any particular age group, but there was a study that came out that over half of Americans get at least some of their news from social media. I recently published an op-ed, and I included a statistic in it. And the editor said, "Hey, can you just find this statistic for me?" And I went through, and I could not find the actual statistic. I could find people citing a statistic, but I could not find the actual piece of research. And it really made me say, I am a part of this problem. Social media is one of the most wonderful things. If you are trying to find a place to stay in all 50 states, It's amazing. It really helped me out a lot. Social media is also an incredible thing that gets you to show up for, I don't know, a Zoom event about an author who's talking about traveling to all 50 states. It's really good for finding out about in-person connection, but it's really dangerous in three specific ways. I work for a mental health nonprofit during the day for young people, and we actually have evidence of how social media affects our brains. The first thing that's so dangerous is it puts us in echo chambers. It actually learns what we like to see and what we hate to see. And it feeds us a diet of the things we love and then something we hate. And so then we see something like, well, I could never agree with that. And then we see something we like, and we're like, well, that's where I stand. And then you rinse and repeat until all of a sudden someone on the other side seems so far removed from something you could ever believe. And you feel so good about where you are that we are just polarized by design due to the algorithms. Number two is it actually robs people of the opportunity to change their minds. Uh, you put something out online, it exists forever. Even if you change it, uh, people are going to remember it forever and they're going to think that, okay, this person's opinion is fixed. No one's opinion is fixed. Everyone is constantly evolving and constantly changing, yet we lock ourselves into these online personas and opinions that then make us seem far more dug in than we actually are. Some of the people that I stayed with, I would look them up on social media because some of them were strangers to me. I was like, wow, this person has some really strong opinions. I can't wait to talk to them about it. And I would sit down with them and they would be the first to admit, I'm not actually 100% sure. Where'd you get that statistic? I don't know. I just saw on the internet. Do you actually feel that way? I don't know if I feel that way. And so it robs us of the opportunity to change our minds. And changing your minds is the greatest gift to me because I believe everyone has the capacity to change their minds if given that capacity. However, social media robs us of that capacity. And then the other thing, it's just not a very good place to have a conversation about politics. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a social media discussion about politics. Oh, it's doing the hand. Oh, wow, that's very cool. Sorry. The hand went up and it showed a hand. Sorry. Zoom has gotten so powerful. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a social media conversation about politics. Raise your hand if you have. Has anyone seen one of those? Anyone? Yeah. Has anyone ever seen it go well? No, no one has ever said they've seen it go well, and I have tried. I have tried so hard. It actually cheapens our public square. It makes it so much worse. It takes nuance out of it. It takes listening out of it. It's just people barking back and forth and sniping at each other. You go to town halls across this country and you see people meaningfully engaging with issues, asking questions, admitting where they don't have all the answers. That is how you make progress. And social media has absolutely warped that and is, in my opinion, the most dangerous thing facing our democracy right now.
Okay, I want to read a quote from the book. Um, you say, maybe embracing the diverse states of mind in our country started with embracing our own community. I'd seen so many Americans get off social media and use their talents organizing, protesting, volunteering, teaching, painting, debating, or just listening to make their communities more cohesive and inclusive. If we could foster that small town feeling of belonging, being listened to, and having a purpose in the community, perhaps we could begin to cool down the rhetoric that had sent our democracy into a fever. From what I had seen, it didn't just seem good for democracy, it seemed to be a roadmap to fulfillment. So essentially, it's our relationships and connections with each other that will not only save our country, but also fulfill our purpose as humans. Can you elaborate a little more on that and tell us if you still feel that way?
Absolutely. I do still feel that way because ultimately, a lot of people want to make the world a better place. Almost everyone does, but a lot of people just don't know how. The problems feel so big, it feels like there's nothing to do except for sit on the sidelines and criticize. I have proof now. I have seen people show up to solve small problems in their community. They say, how do you eat a whale? One bite at a time. And watching people show up to make change, it's good for the soul and it preps you to make even bigger change. I think a lot of young people want to change everything, and it's very hard to change everything without learning how things work. And I think that's why starting at a local level, using your talents to make your community a better place is the best place to start. I always use the example of, someone says, kids are not reading at a high enough level. They are not graduating from high school. It's like, yeah, that's a huge problem facing America. What do you do about it? Well, you can't fix the entire problem unless you become, I don't know, Secretary of Education. And even that is not a guarantee of fixing the problem. But you could show up for your local chapter of Big Brothers Big Sisters and become a mentor to a young person who then, through that program, is virtually guaranteed to graduate from high school. It might not solve the macro problem, but it would make a difference to that one person. And if someone sees you doing that, maybe they'll show up and start doing that. And then if everyone in America showed up in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, statistically, all of those kids would graduate from high school. And that is how change is made. And that is how you feel more connected to your community and you feel empowered to actually do something. And the thing I want to make very clear, if you cannot stand children, if you hate kids like some sort of roll doll character, do not do Big Brothers Big Sisters. I am not saying that you have to show up and do something that you do not enjoy, but you might be a brilliant lawyer and there is a nonprofit in your community, I guarantee, that could use a lawyer on that board to help them with their documents, to help them with pro bono work. There are things that we can do to affect the things we care about where we live. And ultimately, this is the empowering message I try to deliver to people, that you can work on the things you care about one bite at a time. And that's how change is made and how you meet people from other backgrounds that can challenge your worldview. And that word inclusive is so important because inclusive means inclusive of all points of view. If we only stay around the same people and stay in an echo chamber, we never learn about other expertises, other ways of thinking. And it's my belief that the more interface we have with people with different experiences, the smarter we become and the better we solve problems.
So probably not everyone here will be visiting all 50 states. Maybe they have, but if they haven't, how do we take what you did and what you learned and use it in our own community in terms of having those conversations? Like, how did you just start the conversation with people? And do you have any tips or insights for us of how to start those conversations?
Yeah. So this is really the what do you take home from this talk piece? If I can't give you any advice, I'm a fraud. So uh, take out your notebook now. This is the most important part. So I give three pieces of advice. The first is start by changing your mindset to be open to good news. We are bombarded with bad news all the time, and it is so important to be informed. However, do not allow bad news to become the lens through which you see your own community. Because if we lose sight of the good things happening around us, it allows us to become pessimistic and jaded. And I guarantee if you look at things from just the local level, there is something exciting that you can get involved in, something to feed your optimism. And when we are open to the good news that is actually happening, it is a form of taking care of ourselves that allows us to swallow bad news better, but also feel empowered that there are good things going on. So it's just a mind frame change. Be open to good news, specifically in your community. The second piece is show up in your community, become a tourist in your community, show up at organizations that you wouldn't normally go to, start volunteering in your community, not just once, but showing up again and again, because that is the work of democracy. People say democracy is not a spectator sport. That doesn't just apply to voting. Our institutions run on involvement and engagement. And one of the things I admire so much about my grandparents specifically, my parents specifically, is they showed up for local institutions. And I always tell young people that we have to do the same. The third piece, and this is the hardest piece of advice to follow, and It's okay if you don't feel up to it right now, because it's harder than traveling to all 50 states. But I always say, if there's someone with whom you have broken with in the past over politics or a disagreement, find a way to reach out to them and employ some of these tools. Don't sit down to talk about politics. Ask about their upbringing, ask about how they're doing, ask about their expertises. Because to me, one of this great, great challenges in this period is watching relationships get fractured because of politics, watching siblings not talk to each other, watching friendships get broken. I understand that politics are hot right now, and there are a lot of things happening that people are not happy about. But when we cut off people in our lives, then the meanness and the rhetoric wins. And ultimately, the greatest resource we're given in this life is our relationship with our family, with our community, with our friends. And to cut off someone is sometimes the right thing to do. But like cutting down a tree, it takes years and years and years to regrow a relationship like that. So I always just say to people, if you can, I have people in my life that I've had to do the same with. If you're able to sit down with humility, with curiosity, and see if there's anything you can say, I see your point on, even if it's just 10%, I guarantee once you start having that conversation, there will be more that spills out from there, especially if you're focused on the things that you both care about, your community, your interests, your hobbies, and seeing the humanity in other people, because so often a hot political environment can rob people of their humanity. And having a human centered way of talking about politics is ultimately what I'm about. Feel free to look up the nonprofit that I'm on the board of. It's called American Public Square. It is here in Kansas City, and we bring together people who are from different backgrounds to have fact-based conversations about difficult to discuss issues. And there is a magic to it that I cannot explain. Watching people sit down and making sure everyone has all the facts, making sure people are ready to engage and willing to take feedback, willing to question, willing to say, I could be wrong about something. There's something so powerful about it. And I think we are in a time where our relationships are going to be very important going forward. So,
Yeah, I
American Public
mean,
Square.
everything you say, I just read the Surgeon General, talking about loneliness and talking about the epidemic and talking about how it's all about community. So it kind of ties into everything that we've learned about what people need, in terms of survival.
Yeah,
Um, we have a few questions I wanted to ask, and I'm kind of curious about like some stories on the road a little bit. And so one person asked, "What was the most surprising thing you learned, and where was it?"
perfect.
It,
And
it
sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, was it something that you expected? Like, did you have preconceived notions of certain places that were not at all correct?
Yeah, 100%. And before I answer that question, I'm just going to give you something to think about while I'm answering it, because I'm going to be turning the camera back on all of you. At all of my events, I ask everyone 3 questions, and you're welcome to answer any of them, none of them in the chat out loud, but just be thinking about it while I'm talking at you. The first question is, what is something you've changed your mind about? What is something you've changed your mind about? Could be anything. I never wanted a dog. I got a dog. I didn't like olives. Now I like olives. These are all things I've heard. What is something you are open to changing your mind about? You know what? I don't think I would ever skydive, but I could be convinced. I would never vote for someone in the Green Party, but you know what? Maybe I would. And then what is something you would never change your mind about? I do not like movies by Dave Eggers. I did not enjoy Nosferatu. I will never change my mind about that. I will never change my mind that I don't like certain kinds of cheese. Okay. So just think about those in your mind. Something that is so surprising to me, some of the places that are sort of cast off as, I play this game at universities where I say a state, and then someone says the first word that comes into their mind. And sometimes those words are not very nice, especially when you think of a place like West Virginia or Wyoming. Two of my all time favorite states that I visited, gorgeous, wonderful people. We say West Virginia, we think of coal. That is where my mind was at before I visited West Virginia. But one of my favorite chapters in here, the West Virginia chapter, is about this organization in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, started by a former coal miner foreman to prevent a factory from being built that would pollute the Harpers Ferry area. And watching all of these people politically organize, vote people off the city council who were writing permits for this factory, watching people from both sides of the aisle try to stop this factory from being built across from a low income elementary school. We're talking 300-foot smokestacks spewing formaldehyde into the air across the street from young people. It is just amazing watching what happens when a community gets together and decides that they are going to put their foot down. And I just think the preconceived notions we have about certain states and what happens when you actually visit there is amazing. I mean, for example, for me, we read Laramie Project, which is about the murder of Matthew Shepard in Wyoming in high school. So I was just like, obviously very anti-gay Wyoming. Well, I show up in Casper, Wyoming, and the hottest place in town is owned by a woman and her wife, which is a distillery that is a very inclusive place. They're passing non-discrimination acts in the city council. And it just goes to show that because we have a preconceived notion of like what a red state looks like, or even what a blue state looks like. I was in some of the most conservative parts of the country in blue states. You ever been to Northern California, aka the state of Jefferson, that wants to secede from Northern California and join with Oregon? That is something I didn't know anything about. And I think when we consider different states or different regions, we have preconceived notions that affect the way we talk about them. And that trickles down into the way people think about themselves or the way other parts of the country may think about them. Meet a Midwesterner, they've got a chip on their shoulder about being from the flyover country. I don't care who you are, we all do, until you actually show up and you're like, wow, what a really nice place to live, except for the winters. I've been snowed in for 3 days. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Did you have like a really surprising takeaway from anyone that you met that you like you're never going to forget that story and what you learned from that person?
Yeah. So one of my oh sorry, saw a comment. Um um One of my favorite takeaways in the book was I went to a very dangerous intersection in Ohio. Uh, and there was this bar that was called Skeets. And I was the only white guy in there. And I went there with one of my friends who worked for the news in Cleveland. And I had two conversations that were covering the same topic, but saying diametrically opposed things. I was inside just getting a really warm feeling about the bar and the sense of community that it forged. And this guy takes me outside and says, I just want to give you the real story of this bar so you don't just walk away with some falsely rosy impression. I'm just going to read it actually, because I feel like I'm going to paraphrase it quite badly. Um, Here we go. Outside, the streets were dark. Rio told me he didn't want me getting a falsely rosy impression of the neighborhood and asked me candidly what I was looking for at Skeets. The real Cleveland, I said, holding up my recorder. He nodded and pointed across the street at a bar called Cheers. Somebody just got kidnapped over there 3 weeks ago. Dude was coming out of the bar and they pull up in a van, beat the hell out of him with a pistol, shot him in the head 2 times. He lived. Down the street right there, a little girl got off the bus from school, got snatched, killed, put under a porch, 14 years old. So, how does this end? It doesn't. Not ever. In this area, it's not. Because poverty is poverty. Like, shit. Who's to say we're going to wake up tomorrow? That's how we're living. That's all it is. It's about right now, Rio continued. If you ain't got a right now, you ain't got nothing here. I returned inside, shaken but thankful for Rio's commitment to candor. Though I was distracted by what I had learned, my reappearance inside the bar did not go unnoticed. I was approached by a bartender with closely cropped hair, Denise. She offered to show me a hand-painted mural in the backyard. I agreed. She took me by the hand and led me through the crowded bar, shouting, "Excuse me," every few steps. In the backyard, Denise stood in a leather jacket and pointed out faces in the mural of both national and local black celebrities. Denise recounted the history of the mural with a palpable sense of pride as I recorded. She gestured to the bar. This is all we have. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. It's only by the grace of God you're going to be here. And you should try to enjoy your life while you're here, because we don't know how much time we have left. I would prefer to love, and that's why I love this place. Denise's voice shook with emotion. It's all about love, all about acceptance, all about knowing that a person's going through something just like I'm going through something. And I know I can come here and release it a little. Just Because by Johnny Taylor started playing inside the bar. Someone cheered. Do you think if there was a Skeets in every neighborhood in the United States that we'd live in a better country? I asked. Denise grinned. Yes, we would. I thought of the occasional isolating feeling of not having somewhere I belonged while living in the big cities. I think a lot of people feel like they don't have a place to go like this. They don't have a place that feels like family, I said. And that makes me sad, she said, and she looked it. Some people would say I'm just a bartender, but I refuse to close this place on a holiday because I know that I might have a customer who doesn't have anywhere to go. I cook every holiday. If I see someone walking down the street that might not have something, I say, come get yourself something to eat. Because I couldn't rest, thinking someone didn't have anywhere to go or didn't have a hot meal. We're going to feed him. Not just me. No, we're going to feed him. It's what we do, baby. And I think the reason I love that story, it's not about politics. It's about belonging. And it's about how we can look at something from two sides and both things can be true. And I think that is one of my earliest chapters and helped me frame what this journey was all about. It's about how do you live a good life in America? How do you be a good person? How do you feel connected to your community?
Thank you, Ryan. I like that. I think that's a good place to end the recording, and then we're going to open it up to everyone. Hold on one moment.